welcome. So, I was having a chat the other day with a non-gaming friend. Yes, they do exist. Non-gamers are out there, as much as there are people who are only a little bit into gaming. Of course, you're different, you're hardcore. But, this friend basically said to me, dude, what exactly is retro gaming? Where does it start and stop? How do you define it? How do you put it, into something that everybody can understand, everybody can agree upon? And I was like, eek, how do I answer this question? Because when I start to actually think it through, aside from the fact we live in an era when nobody can agree on anything anytime, just open Twitter, open Facebook, go anywhere on the internet, nobody can agree about anything ever. And you want you to give me a definitive answer on what is and is not retro gaming and where it resides and where it does not reside. You want a nice tidy little box. Not possible. Now I know what you're thinking out there. You're all going, but Zemblo, come on mate, that's easy. It's all to do with like the 70s and that, like Pong and like Atari and stuff like that. But then some other people go, oh no, retro gaming, that's like the NES, the SNES. And others will go, yeah, but the N64's retro. And then somebody will pipe up and go, oh, the PlayStation is retro. Somebody also will pipe up and go, oh, the PlayStation 2, that's retro. Now think about that. The PlayStation 2. In North America, at the end of its life, that sucker went online. It ran on DVDs. We still use DVDs. In some circles, the PS3 is thought of as retro. That sucker was fully online, introduced video chatting. Okay, there was video chat available on the PS3. You could run Linux on it if you wanted to. You could swap the hard drives. It was online. And it had Rumble, basically an early version of haptics in its controller, and its controller was wireless. Think of all those things that the PS3 had. That it doesn't make it all that different in a lot of ways from the current generation. PS5, Xbox Series X or Series S, There's a lot of things that make them very similar. There's not that much between, apart from graphical grunt. We do have certain ways it wears. Things are calculated and how graphics are perceived and interactive sound. All kinds of clever ways to make the experience more interactive and more immersive. We've had these things for a few years now, and we've really begun to grapple with that stuff. We're in a range now where we're in the second part of VR. PlayStation VR 2, the various versions of VR that are brought out by other companies. There's too many to mention. Pico and Meta, and even Apple's getting in on the VR game. Microsoft nearly got in on the VR game with that mixed reality headset that they were showing off, and they've kind of scrapped that. But everybody, even phones at one point were doing VR. You would buy a little unit and you'd stick your phone inside it, and you could have two little screens. The screen would segment itself and show two images and basically be a VR headset that you bought because it was your phone. You slotted in the unit, strapped the unit to your face. You were watching videos in VR mode. In fact, there is still a bunch of VR converted videos on YouTube. Because even YouTube got into the game and they were putting videos out that you could watch in 3D VR modes on your phones in little units. So where does retro lie? Where does it start? Where does it stop? Obviously it starts at the very beginning. We can all agree that. If you've got a Pong unit in your house, or if you've got the space and the money, a full-on, Space Invaders arcade unit in your house, You know, if you're that crazy with the money and you've got that level of space and you have a wife that doesn't mind. I don't think I could ever get an arcade unit in this house. I think my wife would disown me. Also for no space. But where does it actually start? Where does it actually stop? Yeah. Where do we get to a point where we can say that's not retro? Obviously we can say PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles are not retro. They're current gen. But even then you have a sticky point, because we still have people now, little over 2.5 years into the lifespan of the current gen system, that still call the current gen next gen. We can't even agree that next gen and current gen are even the same thing. Mostly because we still have a lot of people who are on the last gen. There's so many people out there still playing on PS4. There's still many people out there playing on Xbox One S. You know, or whatever version of the last Xbox there is, because let's face it, there's about like 3 versions of it. And all various price structures and you know, strengths, but you know, there were previous versions of last generation Xbox, and there were previous versions of last generation PlayStation. I mean, PlayStation Pro, PlayStation Slim, you know, and the original launch unit. Now, admittedly, yes, towards the latter end of the PlayStation 4 lifespan, the Slim became the de facto PlayStation 4 as the original PlayStation 4 model went out of production. So there's that to deal with. So at what point does PlayStation 4 become retro? Because think of this, right? In like a couple of months or whatever now, 2-3 months, PlayStation 4 will be 10 years old. Think about that. Things that are going to be 10 years old. Most of the life of my kid. We're talking like Tearaway, talking like Bioshock Infinite, Grand Theft Auto 5, this channel, The Last of Us. All these things this year will become 10 years old. A decade of me doing this nonsense is certainly in the list, as I've said. So, where does it stop being retro? When does something become retro? It's a tricky one, you know? It's amorphous is what I meant to say, you know? It's just, how do you grapple with this question in an easy, definable way that non-gamers, hell, even gamers, can agree upon? Because as I've previously specified, it's hard to get anybody, anywhere, defying subgenres, you know, to agree upon anything. Put it this way. Can you play a light gun game now? No. Because TVs are built different. TVs are no longer built up. Their images are no longer created in the same way that CRTV TV's images are created. Because a light gun was basically a tiny little camera that looked at the part of the screen that you were firing at, and it told the system that's where the gun's pointed. So when you then clicked the trigger, it knew that you were clicking the trigger at that part of the screen, and it would tell the system that that's the part of the screen you were clicking at. And if it was the part of the screen you were clicking at where the action was happening, then that would be the way for the game to be told that you hit that target. That's basically how light guns work. Now, since PS4, we don't really have light guns. What we had was the sharpshooter, and then, you know, on PS3, and then we moved on to the aim gun, you know, both of which were utilised technology from PlayStation Move. I mean, because the aim gun is basically just the sharpshooter, but just wrapped up, break apart. Because the sharpshooter, you slotted your nav in one bit, you put your PlayStation Move in the other bit, and it was all housed and blah blah blah. Whilst the aim gun is literally just one encasement for all the same gubbins with some slightly different coding, and that works, with PlayStation VR. But considering that PlayStation VR 2 has inside-out tracking, there's no need for Move controllers, ergo, there's no need to have the tracking that looks at a gun. So you could, admittedly, like I put in that video a wee while ago, where you could have guns just so you could have the feel of the immersion. And they could sell all kinds of different plastic kits of different types of weapons just so you feel that you're a bit more involved and have that immersion of holding something. And obviously you'd have lines in it and that, so the inside out tracking could look at the gun model in your hand, and where you pointed with the gun, the inside out tracker would be able to point, know that you're pointing at the thing you're pointing at in your personal reality of your headset. But does that mean eventually that PlayStation VR will become retro? It all starts to get really muddy, really squishy and imprecise. Consider the fact that we have modern systems that can play retro games. Does that mean that the games become unretro? Does it mean that modern systems can be considered retro systems because they can play those games? You have PlayStation Plus, you have the premium selection for PlayStation Plus. You're going back and you're playing games from PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and you can download, stream games from PlayStation 3, although those games should be downloadable. You need to figure that out, Sony, because that's just not good enough. I mean, we've got hackers out there who are figuring out every day how to play PlayStation 3 games not on a PlayStation 3. Hire these people, Sony, get the PlayStation 3 games on premium properly. Geico's a failure. Let's just move on. Anyway, bringing it back to how do we define retro? Do we keep it nothing more than the 90s? We have the whole Sega Nintendo war, then we have the early war between Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony. Do we keep it in that sort of early sphere? Do we include the Dreamcast? Do we include the Jaguar? The Panasonic 3DO Real? A lot of people would say yes. A lot of people would say no. Do we consider the idea that arcades are retro? Then what arcade games are retro? What arcade games aren't retro? Because we're still getting arcade games. Admittedly not as much as we used to, but they still happen. Is the very concept of retro a misnomer when we come to PC? Look at the PC market, there's always new tech, there's always a new graphics card or cooling unit or some form of internal gubbins. I mean, I'm not a PC guy, I don't really know the whole PC thing, but there's always a new bit of kit to buy, there's always a new software patch, there's always a new something. So a PC that's anywhere from 3 years old, with the rate that PC stuff happens, could be considered retro. It's just too wild, it's too crazy, and it's not something you can easily describe to someone who isn't into gaming, because the more you discuss it and the more you try to define it, the more that non-gaming person, and quite frankly, some actual gaming people, their eyes are just going to glaze over. They're going to be like, dude, stop. Dude, please. Information overload. I can't handle it. And they're within their rights, because this is a deeply confusing, constantly moving, it's just mess. What is retro? How do you define retro? Where does it end? When does something become retro? So, typey down below, let Zenbloke know, where do you consider retro to be? What is retro? When does something get the chance to be retro? And just because it's retro, does that mean it gets re-evaluated? Do retro games then all of a sudden go, oh, it's good because it's retro? Is it? Are we going to call Bubsy good? Are we going to call Croc good? I see people all the time online going, oh, I want Croc back. No, you don't. I played Croc back in the day. It was rubbish. But we have this rose-tinted ideal of the past. Oh, it was simpler times. Yeah, it was simpler times because you were younger. You didn't have a job. You were at school. Or you were a student. When I think back to like 1994 and like to about saying maybe 1997 and stuff, my prime PlayStation days, before like PlayStation 2. And PlayStation 2, as I said, came out 2000. Those first few years, I was unemployed, but I had all the time in the world. I had no money, but I had time. I was gaming with my mates. I used to have my pals round to my flat. We'd sit on the couch together and just game. We'd have these massive tournaments of like Soul Blade and Tekken, and passing the pad, and like, playing like endless races on like Ridge Racer or whatever, and just passing the pad and like who could do the better lap time. Oh, look at that, he spun it. It just is retro more about the memories of the gaming than the actual games themselves? Food for thought. Anyway, I keep just going on and on and on. I need to make some sort of a point here. The only point I can actually make is hashtag support Scottish YouTubers, and of course, as always, no bother.